So I'll be reading from Samyutta Nikaya 46, point 54. So this is a translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi, and this is called Metta Sahagata, or accompanied by loving kindness. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling among the Kalyans, where there was a town of the Kalyans named Halidavasana. Then in the morning, a number of bhikkhus dressed and taking their bowls and robes entered Halidavasana for alms. Then it occurred to them, it is still too early to walk for alms in Halidavasana. Let us go to the park of the wanderers of other sects. Then those bhikkhus went to the park of the wanderers of other sects. They exchanged greetings with those wanderers, and when they had concluded their greetings and cordial talk, sat down to one side. The wanderers then said to them, "Friends, the ascetic Gautama teaches the Dhamma to his disciples thus: Come, bhikkhus, abandon the 5 hindrances, the corruptions of the mind that weaken wisdom, and dwell pervading 1/4 with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Likewise, the 2nd quarter, the 3rd quarter, and the 4th quarter. Thus above, below, across, and everywhere, and to all as to oneself, dwell pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, vast, exalted, measureless, without hostility, without ill will, dwell pervading 1/4 with a mind imbued with compassion. Likewise, the 2nd quarter, the 3rd quarter, and the 4th quarter. Thus above, below, across, and everywhere, and to all as to oneself, dwell pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with compassion, vast, exalted, measureless, without hostility, without ill will, dwell pervading 1/4 with a mind imbued with altruistic joy. Likewise, the 2nd quarter, the 3rd quarter, and the 4th quarter. Thus above, below, across, and everywhere, and to all as to oneself, dwell pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with altruistic joy, vast, exalted, measureless, without hostility, without ill will, dwell pervading 1/4 with a mind imbued with equanimity. Likewise, the 2nd quarter, the 3rd quarter, and the 4th quarter. Thus above, below, across, and everywhere, and to all as to oneself, dwell pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with equanimity, vast, exalted, measureless, without hostility, without ill will." And so then the ascetics continue and they say, "We too, friends, teach the Dhamma to our disciples thus: Come, friends, abandon the 5 hindrances, dwell pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, equanimity, without ill will." So, friends, what here is the distinction, the disparity, the difference between the ascetic Gautama and us? That is, regarding the one Dhamma teaching and the other, regarding the one manner of instruction and the other. So the practice of the 4 brahmaviharas, the practice of loving kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity, imbuing the mind first with these qualities. You start off in the practice with loving kindness, and then you extend it on to the rest of the universe, and you experience different states of mind, which are the different jhanas. But it's not unique to the Dhamma. It's not unique to the Buddha's dispensation. The understanding of the brahmaviharas and how to pervade and radiate the brahmaviharas. In the Yoga Sutras, it's mentioned a couple of times how, for example, one imbues the mind with any of these brahmaviharas to experience a stability of consciousness, as it's known. Well, which really is referring to a state like jhana, where the mind becomes collected. And in another section of the Yoga Sutras, it talks about how one can imbue the mind with any of these brahmaviharas and personify, in other words, become that quality in everything that one does. But there is a difference in terms of how it is taught, let's say, in the Yoga Sutras. In fact, I would say that right now in modern yoga teaching, more often than not, this kind of practice isn't really taught. It is something that is in the Yoga Sutras, but rarely does anybody actually use that practice as their main practice, or even as a secondary practice in the system of yoga. But regardless, at that time, the brahmaviharas were not unique to any school of thought. It was understood as being these universal feelings, mental feelings that could help one attain the state of the Brahma, the state of the Brahma Lokas. And the way the Buddha introduced the brahmaviharas, or reintroduced them and recontextualized them, we'll see how he does that. Because yes, in this practice, you are sending loving kindness to yourself, and then your spiritual friend, if you're there, and then eventually radiating in all directions to the universe. But there's a way of doing it. And you'll see in the way the Buddha explains this, how it's done, so that the mind isn't one-pointed, so that the mind doesn't become the brahmavihara, so that the mind doesn't unify in such a way that it is one-pointed and focused, and thus suppressing the hindrances, but as well as the enlightenment factors and the insights that arise from this practice. Then those bhikkhus neither delighted in nor rejected the statement of those wanderers. Without delighting in it, without rejecting it, they rose from their seats and left, thinking, "We shall learn the meaning of this statement in the presence of the Blessed One." Then, when those bhikkhus had walked for alms in Halidavasana and returned from the alms round, after their meal, they approached the Blessed One. Having paid homage to him, they sat down to one side and reported to him the entire discussion between those wanderers and themselves. And this is what the Blessed One said. Bhikkhus, when wanderers of other sects speak thus, they should be asked, "Friends, how is the liberation of the mind by loving kindness developed? What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its final goal? How is the liberation of the mind by compassion developed? What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its final goal? How is the liberation of the mind by altruistic joy developed? What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its final goal? How is the liberation of the mind by equanimity developed? What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its final goal? Being asked thus, those wanderers would not be able to reply, and further, they would meet with vexation. For what reason? Because that would not be within their domain. I do not see anyone, bhikkhus, in this world with its devas, Mara, and Brahma, In this generation, with its ascetics and Brahmins, its devas and humans, who could satisfy the mind with an answer to these questions except the Tathagat, or a disciple of the Tathagat, or one who has heard it from them. And how bhikkhus is a liberation of the mind by loving kindness developed. When we use this term, liberation of the mind, that comes from the Pali Cheto Vimutti. There's two understandings of Vimutti, or rather three. There is Panya Vimutti, Cheto Vimutti, and liberated in both ways. And what that's referring to is Panya Vimutti is liberation through the 4 jhanas. Cheto Vimutti is liberation through all 8 jhanas. So Cheto Vimutti has different connotations depending upon how it's used and what prefaces it. In other words, there is the Akupa Cheto Vimutti, which is the unshakable liberation of the mind, which is the mind of the Arahat. There is the empty liberation of the mind, which is the understanding of not self. There is the void. There is the understanding of the immeasurable liberation of the mind, which is taking into account the brahmaviharas. When you radiate the brahmaviharas, you experience the immeasurable mind. And so liberation here can mean twofold. It can mean the liberation, that is to say, an attainment, specifically the final full awakening, or it could also mean a temporary liberation, in which case that would be jhana. The reason jhana is understood as a temporary liberation is because when you are in jhana, there are a few things that are happening for you to be able to be in jhana. Number one, there are no longer any hindrances present in the mind. It's the cessation of any unwholesome states of mind, which are the hindrances, and withdrawn from sensual pleasures, which means that the mind or its attention is not scattered in different directions in terms of what's happening outside. It's collected around its object of meditation. There's a couple of suttas where it's said that if one were to have just, or cultivate and develop just the finger snap length of loving kindness, one is said to be devoid of jhana, which means that loving kindness or compassion or joy or equanimity are pathways to experience jhana, which ultimately is the way to experience liberation of the mind. So this is the temporary liberation, being jhana, means that you are liberated in that moment, or as long as you are in that jhana, from any of the 5 hindrances and from any sensual pleasure, which cultivates the mind to experience in tandem with samatha, in tandem with the calmness of jhana, the insight or the vipassana. So vipassana and samatha are not to be divorced. They are to be conjoined to experience the ultimate liberation of the mind. If you think about, or if you go to Anupada Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 111, there you have a wonderful, clear description of what Sariputta's mind is going through when he experiences jhana, each of the jhanas. He just doesn't experience the calmness of the jhana. He doesn't just experience the samatha of the jhana. He experiences the insight aspect, which is to say, he is observing how mind's attention moves. And therefore, he's understanding what states are there, what states stay, and what states cease. He's understanding for himself in the here and now the phenomena as being anicca, as being impermanent, and therefore not worth holding on to, and therefore not to be considered as self. But it's not something that he is investigating into. He is seeing as and when phenomena arise and pass away. And that is because primarily he has developed the enlightenment factors. And we'll go into each one. And this is how the practice of loving kindness and any of the other brahmaviharas, which take you to the different jhanas, or the limits of them are different jhanas. This is how the practice shows you how mind's attention moves, because by using the enlightenment factors, which doesn't happen in other practices outside of the scope of the Buddha's dispensation, you are understanding for yourself how mind works, how this mental processes work, how this phenomena arises and passes away, and therefore experience and understand how formations arise and pass away. And ultimately, when you experience the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness and come out of it, you see for yourself the impersonal nature of dependent origination altogether. So the Buddha says, what does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its final goal? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness accompanied by loving kindness, the enlightenment factor of investigation of states accompanied by loving kindness, the enlightenment factor of energy accompanied by loving kindness, the enlightenment factor of joy accompanied by loving kindness, the enlightenment factor of tranquility accompanied by loving kindness, the enlightenment factor of collectedness accompanied by loving kindness, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity accompanied by loving kindness. All these based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. There's a reason why they're called enlightenment factors. They are the factors that lead you to awakening. They're also known as the awakening factors, obviously. But if you don't have these factors, then you are not said to be in the jhana that the Buddha talks about, which leads you to liberation of the mind. So when you are in a jhana, there is the non-presence of the five hindrances, and there is the presence of varying degrees of the enlightenment factors. And how do you use the enlightenment factors when you start off? The thing about it is you're not exercising the enlightenment factors in the sense of consciously investigating what's happening. They happen, they develop because of your intention to remain collected, because of your intention to stay with the object of the meditation, which is loving kindness or any of the brahmaviharas. So what is the mindfulness enlightenment factor? The mindfulness enlightenment factor is observation, observing how mind's attention moves from one object to the other. So you're not developing it. It is a quality of mind that you have when you are in the moment observing how mind is staying with it, with its object of meditation. In other words, you are not the mind meditating on the object. There is just an observing of how mind is meditating, how mind is observing what is going on. So there's an observation. This is also sometimes referred to as metacognitive awareness. That's just a fancy way of saying it's mind watching mind, mind observing itself, its attention, and how it moves if it does move from its object of meditation. And what is the investigation of states enlightenment factor? This comes from the word kammic. This is the one that keeps getting people caught up into the idea that you have to analyze and contemplate and investigate to the extent that you start engaging the thinking processes of the mind. But that's not the case. Dhamma or investigation of states, another way of understanding them is seeing them as being what is present, understanding what is present and what is not present. That's it. So if observation is just the pure understanding, pure awareness of what is there, then Dhamma is the perception of what it is observing. So just as you have feeling and perception conjoined, just as when you see me, your eyes are seeing, but you are recognizing who it is that you're seeing through perception. In the same way, just as you're observing mind's attention, the Dhamma is seeing what the object of that attention is, or it's seeing, okay, now the mind is distracted. So it's not something that you have to investigate. Is the mind distracted? Is it not distracted? What is required here? What is not required here? That happens when you analyze. That happens when you engage the thinking mind. But just the bare awareness of what's happening, accompanied, which is the observation, which is the mindfulness, accompanied by the perception of what it is that is happening, the recognition of what is happening, is the Dhammavichaya. And what is the energy factor, the enlightenment factor of energy? Energy here is twofold. Virya, which means the energy of the mind. Is the mind uplifted, or is the mind too restless, or is the mind having sloth and torpor? So you're using your perception, your Dhammavichaya, to notice, is the mind feeling one way or another in terms of the quality of the energy? But the second understanding is the practice of using right effort. So when you are engaging with the enlightenment factor of energy, you are noticing, is the mind in sloth and torpor, or is the mind in restlessness, or is the mind having balanced energy? And if it's any of the other extremes, then you're using effort to balance the energy. You're using right effort to balance it. The joy enlightenment factor is something that arises as a result of being collected with the object of meditation. So what we're saying here is that there is this linear understanding of the enlightenment factors, but there is also an interdependent and integrative understanding of the enlightenment factors. And there's a cyclical understanding of the enlightenment factors. Because if you think about it, if you understand it from the course of the 4 jhanas, you have the enlightenment factor of joy present in the first and second jhana. It's still there to an extent, but not as rampant in the first and second jhana. And then eventually, in the 4th jhana, you have what is the mindfulness that is tempered by equanimity, that is purified by equanimity, which means that as you start to progress through the meditation, the enlightenment factors come into balance, and then there's equanimity, which is part of that 4th jhana, but it informs the mindfulness again. So the mindfulness is deepened, the observation is deepened because it is more collected, because there is more equanimity. So now this joy, it leads to tranquility. And tranquility here just means a mind that is relaxed and open. Not a mind that is constricted, not a mind that is contracted. If you're trying too hard, if you're pushing your mind and you're just watching the mind pushing itself, you will feel a band of tightness in the head. And accompanied by that, you will feel restlessness, and therefore you are no longer tranquil. When you notice this, you let go of that, use the 6R process. So now you are using the balancing of energy through right effort to then come back to a more tranquil mindset, a more tranquil observation of what is happening. Then when you have tranquility, you then have collectedness. Collectedness is the unified mindset. And unified doesn't mean that the mind becomes the object of meditation. The mind uses the object of meditation as an anchor for its attention. In other words, you're using an object for the mind to become unified around it. And your awareness is open enough so that while it's anchored, there is deeper understanding of how the mind's processes are working in tandem with being collected. And this leads to equanimity. This equanimity is seeing things as they really are without being affected one way or the other. Another way of understanding equanimity is from the Pali term, Yata Buddha Jnana Dasanam. Yata Buddha means reality as it is. Jnana Dasanam means knowledge and vision. So you're seeing things as they really are without being affected by them. It gives you neither pleasure nor gives you pain. There is complete balance of mind. And it's not something that you have to engage with in the form of intentionalizing that equanimity, at least not in the beginning of the practice. It happens as a natural progression. So your job here is to observe. That's the intent, as far as the intention goes, is to, once you have the loving kindness, to observe the loving kindness, to let the mind observe its own attention on the loving kindness. When you do this, the rest of the factors get developed naturally. There's no need for you to make an unnecessary amount of effort to cultivate them. All you have to do is observe in 6R whenever necessary. That is to say, when you see, you're observing and using the investigation of states to see, the mind is now distracted, you're using the 6Rs. Now, the 6Rs themselves also help you to engage with the enlightenment factors. Namely, when you recognize, you're noticing, you're observing that mind's attention has moved, and you are investigating that mind's attention has moved. This is recognition, recognizing. When you make the effort to release your attention from there, you are now engaging in balancing your energy by no longer having it affected, your mental energy affected by the hindrance. And you're using right effort to let go. You're using the right amount of effort to release your attention from there. When you relax, you are engaging or activating the enlightenment factor of tranquility. When you come back to your smile, you're engaging the enlightenment factor of joy. And notice that there is this interconnection between joy and tranquility. One comes after the other in whatever order it might come in, doesn't matter. Then, once you have the smile, you have the loving kindness, you return back to the loving kindness, which means now there is collectedness. And you are just observing. Now the observation is purified by equanimity, seeing things as they really are without getting affected. When this happens, this allows your mind to become more collected, much easier and much deeper. And so the reason why the Buddha says that these enlightenment factors are based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. When we talk about seclusion, this is an interesting translation because the word seclusion comes from the word viveka. And the Pali term viveka has a dual meaning. Of course, it means seclusion, but there's a different meaning which means to discern, which means to know the real from the unreal. And so when you see things as they really are, then you have these enlightenment factors in balance. Dispassion. Now you see things when they arise, you no longer are affected by them to such an extent that they don't matter anymore. Now the mind is satisfied and content in itself. And finally, you have cessation. You have cessation of suffering. When you use the relaxed step, you are experiencing nirodha, you're experiencing cessation, which then matures in release, which is to say you have an experience of an attainment where the fetters are either broken or they're weakened, depending upon the attainment. If he wishes, may I dwell perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive. He dwells perceiving the repulsive therein. If he wishes, may I dwell perceiving the unrepulsive in the repulsive. He dwells perceiving the unrepulsive therein. If he wishes, may I dwell perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive, and in the repulsive. He dwells perceiving the repulsive therein. If he wishes, may I dwell perceiving the unrepulsive in the repulsive, and in the unrepulsive. He dwells perceiving the unrepulsive therein. If he wishes, avoiding both the unrepulsive and the repulsive, may I dwell equanimously, mindful and clearly comprehending. Then he dwells therein equanimously, mindful and clearly comprehending. So here, what the Buddha is talking about is using perception in a way that you're able to understand perception as being impermanent and impersonal. the mind deals in concepts of good or bad, wholesome and unwholesome, negative or positive, repulsive or unrepulsive. But that's all within conditioned reality. What is repulsive one day can appear unrepulsive the next day or in the next moment, and vice versa. So it's a matter of understanding that your perception is not you. Your perception is not yourself. Your perception is not yours. Perception is just a function of the mind. And by doing so, by seeing it in this manner, exercising the perception in this manner, you can go back to different memories with a different attitude. If you have anger and irritation and unwholesome states of mind, and you go to a beautiful memory, to a wholesome memory, there is bound to be some kind of judgment there. There's bound to be some kind of perception that sees it as repulsive. In a similar manner, if you are in a loving and kind attitude, you have compassion, and you look back on an unwholesome memory where somebody said something to you, now you don't look at it through the lens of hatred and annoyance. You look at it from compassion and say, well, that person was having a bad day, or, I hope they're doing okay now. So memories themselves, which is what perception is rooted in, that is the recognition aspect of the mind, change depending upon the quality of the mind. And ultimately, when you see things as they really are, then your mind is understood to be in a state of equanimity. Your mind is understood to be in a state that is totally mindful and clearly comprehending, seeing things as they really are, without the mind projecting ideas of what things should be or shouldn't be, what things, the reality of the situation ought to be. You're not fighting with the present moment. You are just seeing it as it actually is. And then the Buddha continues, or else he enters and dwells in the deliverance of the beautiful. The deliverance of the beautiful means the fourth jhana. The fourth jhana is sometimes referred to as the beautiful. Bhikkhus, the liberation of mind by loving kindness has the beautiful as its culmination. I say, for a wise bhikkhu here who has not penetrated to a superior liberation. So in other words, the limit of loving kindness is the fourth jhana. So the culmination of loving kindness is the fourth jhana. But what also the Buddha says is that it's for a wise bhikkhu here who has not penetrated to superior liberation. This can have two meanings. One is you get up to the fourth jhana and you just don't go beyond. Or second is, having gone to the fourth jhana, you experience the complete liberation of the mind. So if you do that, then you're not limited to just the fourth jhana. Now you experience complete release. And how bhikkhus is a liberation of the mind by compassion developed? What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its final goal? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness accompanied by compassion, the enlightenment factor of investigation of states accompanied by compassion, the enlightenment factor of energy accompanied by compassion, the enlightenment factor of joy accompanied by compassion, the enlightenment factor of tranquility accompanied by compassion, the enlightenment factor accompanied by collectedness, the enlightenment factor of collectedness accompanied by compassion, the enlightenment factor of equanimity accompanied by compassion, based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. So he says the same thing. If he wishes, may I dwell perceiving the repulsive and the unrepulsive. He dwells perceiving the repulsive therein, and so on. And so if he wishes, avoiding both the unrepulsive and the repulsive, may I dwell equanimously, mindful and clearly comprehending, then he dwells therein equanimously, mindful and clearly comprehending, or else with the complete transcendence of perceptions of forms, with the passing away of perceptions of sensory impingement, with non-attention to perceptions of diversity, aware that space is infinite, he enters and dwells in the base of the infinity of space. So let's unpack that. So first we have to understand, what is compassion? In everyday life, compassion is seeing the suffering of another being, but giving them the space to be in that suffering. No one here is required to be a martyr. No one here is required to be a savior. Everybody is responsible for their own welfare and happiness. Everybody is responsible for their own karma, good or bad, or indifferent, whatever it might be. So compassion is being there for that being, being there for that individual who is suffering, but not becoming a crutch to them. You are providing them the space to have their own insights, to be able to come out of their suffering, while supporting them with, kind words, supporting them with kind actions, supporting them with whatever you can do, while also allowing them to learn from whatever it is that's happening. This is obviously recognizable by parents. Sometimes parents want to do everything for their children, but in that way, children won't grow. Parents have to give children the space to mature on their own, through learning through their own mistakes, while at the same time being there, obviously, to feed them and clothe them and shelter them and whatever it might be. But you cannot take them out of their trouble if they don't learn anything from it. You have to allow them to see what's going on, learn from it, and come out of it for themselves. You think about it from the perspective of your own mind. If somebody were to give you all of the answers, somebody would give you all of the insights, so what? Somebody gives you the truth to all of reality, so what? You only know it on an intellectual level. If you see it for yourself through direct experience, then it's all worth it. Otherwise, it's all just reading and memorizing and learning, but not applying. So a person can be there to provide you insights. A person can be there to guide you and nudge you along the way. But you have to take the steps. You have to take the actions and see for yourself with direct experience how this process works. And then for yourself, experience the liberation of mind. So it says the complete transcendence of perceptions of forms. Now we are entering into the arupa territory. Now we're entering into beyond just contact with this body. We're entering into a mental field. Here we're no longer paying attention to the body or the head or any part of the body. Here we are understanding things in a mental realm. The passing away of perceptions of sensory impingement. In other words, when you're in the fourth jhana, there is still contact with the body, even with the fifth jhana, in terms of infinite space and so on. But you might feel it for a moment and then not get distracted by it. You just understand it to be there and you don't allow it to distract you. With the non-attention to perceptions of diversity. So while you're in this state, there can be sounds going on. There can be all kinds of noises going on, and you will be able to hear them. But your mind is so attentive, so collected, that it doesn't scatter to that sound. There is knowledge and awareness that there is a sound outside, but it doesn't detract you from the meditation. It doesn't take your attention away from that. So perceptions of diversity refer to perceptions of the sense spaces. Aware that space is infinite. This happens when you radiate loving kindness outward, and that loving kindness eventually changes to compassion. You experience the infinity of space. You experience this boundless, endless, borderless space, just continual expansion. Bhikkhus, the liberation of mind by compassion, as the base of the infinity of space, as it's called, culmination, I say, For a wise bhikkhu here who has not penetrated to a superior liberation. So the limit, the culmination of compassion is infinite space. And one who doesn't go beyond stays there, or they experience the liberation of mind through understanding. And how bhikkhus is a liberation of the mind by altruistic joy developed. What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its final goal? Pure bhikkhus, a bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness accompanied by altruistic joy, the enlightenment factor of investigation of states accompanied by altruistic joy, the enlightenment factor of energy accompanied by altruistic joy, the enlightenment factor of joy accompanied by altruistic joy, the enlightenment factor of tranquility accompanied by altruistic joy, the enlightenment factor of collectedness accompanied by altruistic joy, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity accompanied by altruistic joy, based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. So you have to understand, when we talk about the experience of these enlightenment factors accompanied by these brahmaviharas, what we're saying is when there is the presence of these enlightenment factors, then you are experiencing jhana. You're beginning to experience jhana along with the brahmavihara associated or connected with that jhana. If he wishes, may I dwell perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive, he dwells perceiving the repulsive therein, and so on. If he wishes, avoiding both the unrepulsive and the repulsive, may I dwell equanimously, mindful and clearly comprehending. Then he dwells therein equanimously, mindful and clearly comprehending. Or else by completely transcending the base of the infinity of space, aware that consciousness is infinite, he enters and dwells in the base of the infinity of consciousness. So the understanding that consciousness is infinite isn't to say that there is this pervading of consciousness all throughout infinite space. There's an understanding that consciousness, as we understand it, is just like you see a ray of light. That ray of light is made up of quintillions and quintillions of photons, individual photons, which give the appearance of a ray of light. In the same way, as we understand this consciousness flowing, it is actually made up of millions and millions of iotas of singular individual consciousnesses that arise and pass away, giving the mind the idea or the illusion that it is just one flowing awareness that is happening. This happens in infinite consciousness. It's not something you have to look for. It's not something that you have to construct. It's something you do by just relaxing into the experience. The loving kindness changes to a softer experience of a compassion, and that compassion changes into a contented joy. And that joy is accompanied with the understanding of infinite consciousness. So when you understand infinite consciousness, you see the arising and passing away of eye consciousness, or ear consciousness, or nose consciousness, or tongue consciousness, or body consciousness, or mind consciousness. Some people see lights flickering and arising and passing away. Some people hear buzzing, or some people hear clicks. Some people smell phantom smells. Some people taste phantom tastes. Some people feel itchy or creepy, crawly things on their face or skin. And some people see the slowing down of the thoughts and starting to see the space between what's arising and passing away in their observation. All of these and others are signs of the experience of infinite consciousness. Once you see this, you are seeing for yourself the tilakkhana. You're seeing for yourself the three symptoms of reality, the three characteristics of existence. You're seeing for yourself how this whole process is impermanent because of the continual arising and passing away. When you see this, the mind starts to get bored and tired of it. And this is suffering. This is dukkha. When you see this, you understand this to be impersonal. There's no controller here. It's all an impersonal process. And so accompanied by that is the experience in that whole process, the altruistic joy, mudita. Now, the experience of mudita is just the experience of joy. It's a very content joy. In your everyday living, altruistic joy is understood to be an antidote for jealousy and envy. Altruistic joy is the joy that celebrates in the success of others in a wholesome manner, provided that success is obviously wholesome. So instead of getting jealous of somebody who has an attainment, or jealous of somebody who got that promotion, or jealous of somebody who got married, or whatever it might be, you celebrate in their success. And that is the experience of altruistic joy. In the meditation, it's just this experience of a content, uplifted experience of joy. Bhikkhus, the liberation of mind by altruistic joy has the base of the infinity of consciousness as its culmination, I say. For a wise bhikkhu here who has not penetrated to superior liberation. So if you haven't gone beyond, you stay there. Or if you have, then you experience the release of mind, or you go into the next state, which is equanimity. And how bhikkhus is the liberation of the mind by equanimity developed? What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its final goal? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness accompanied by equanimity, the enlightenment factor of investigation of states accompanied by equanimity, the enlightenment factor of energy accompanied by equanimity, the enlightenment factor of joy accompanied by equanimity, the enlightenment factor of tranquility accompanied by equanimity, the enlightenment factor of collectedness accompanied by equanimity, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity accompanied by equanimity, based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. So equanimity as a brahmavihara is the quality of mind where everything is balanced. The enlightenment factor of equanimity is seeing things as they really are. So in the fourth jhana, when you experience the enlightenment factor of equanimity, you're seeing things as they really are, but you're also experiencing this balance of mind. Now, when you get to this level of equanimity in the seventh jhana, in nothingness, as we'll see, here the balance of mind is pristine. It's much, much, much deeper. It's completely undisturbed. There's nothing going on there. And we'll understand this when we talk about nothingness. If he wishes, may I dwell perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive, he dwells perceiving the repulsive therein, and so on. If he wishes, avoiding both the unrepulsive and the repulsive, may I dwell equanimously, mindful and clearly comprehending, then he dwells therein equanimously, mindful and clearly comprehending. Or else, by completely transcending the base of the infinity of consciousness, aware that there is nothing, he enters and dwells in the base of nothingness. So nothingness happens right after the experience of infinite consciousness. Again, you don't have to intentionalize to go into that. All you're seeing is there are gaps in between the flickering that's happening, whether it's through the eyes or ears or whatever you're experiencing in the form of the infinite consciousness. Eventually, those gaps widen and the flickering slows down. And then eventually that gap becomes the background of the mind. That is the experience of nothingness. The mind calms down to such a level that it experiences equanimity. That content feeling of joy now transitions into the feeling of equanimity. Bhikkhus, the liberation of mind by equanimity has the base of nothingness as its culmination, I say, for a wise bhikkhu here who has not penetrated to superior liberation. So the limit of the brahmaviharas, the equanimity, which is the most refined mental feeling the mind can experience, happens at the base of nothingness. Beyond this, the Buddha doesn't talk about here, but beyond this in terms of the experience, now you experience quiet mind. So this is the end of the sutta, but now I'm going to talk to you about what happens with quiet mind. So eventually you start radiating this equanimity, and then that starts to fade away on its own. It just stops. And you start sending it out again, and then it stops again. Eventually the mind doesn't want to radiate at all. And in that space is what is quiet mind, that collectedness of mind. It is the radiant, bright, collected, pure mind. This is also known as the luminous mind. This is the vipassana chitta. This is the mind that is luminous, and it is completely translucent, completely radiant. There's nothing to hold on to except for mind just observing itself without any feeling, without any experience accompanied by it. And when you get to here, you'll get to the 8th jhana of neither perception nor non-perception. And here it's like a state where you are asleep, but you're quite alert. There's no grogginess there. And this is a level of quiet mind. And eventually you start to see the arising and passing away of formations, these proto-thoughts that bubble up but don't fully form into thoughts. You start to notice some kind of disconnected thoughts happening here and there. All you have to do there is siksar, just release it, let it go, and stay with the quiet mind, stay with that space. And the longer you stay here, the less vibrations arise in the form of those formations and different kinds of thoughts. And eventually there is utter silence for quite some time. And by this point, you're meditating for at least 3, 4, 5 hours even. And you have to be able to stay in quiet mind for as long as possible. And that happens only when you balance the enlightenment factors. Now, and at this level, the mind is so pure, the mind is so subtle that any kind of movement seems like a lot to it, any kind of very little movement. So you make tiny adjustments based on your observation of quiet mind. If you start to see that your attention is deviating towards restlessness, and that means that you're trying too hard, then you have to relax. Then you have to pull back your attention and return the collectedness back to quiet mind. If you see that the attention is starting to drift away and it's starting to get into sloth and torpor, then you need to bring up a little bit more interest, bring up a little bit more joy. Just tranquil, this very, very small micro doses of it. So you'll just need a little bit of joy, just a little bit of interest, little adjustments here and there, and you start to see how mind just swerves back to the collectedness of quiet mind. So just to summarize that, when you have restlessness, you use 3 enlightenment factors. You use tranquility, you use collectedness, and you use equanimity. When you have sloth and torpor, you're using your awareness, you're using your investigation of states to observe what's going on. You're understanding that this is what's going on. And by doing so, you're putting a little more effort, just tiny bits of effort to bring in some more joy, and then let that mind collect itself around quiet mind. Once all of the enlightenment factors are in balance and you are with quiet mind for some time, that then transitions into an experience of disenchantment. That disenchantment then transitions into dispassion. And then when there are no more formations arising, when the subtlest formation is released, then there is the experience of cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. When you come out of that, then you see reality as it is, which means you have an experience of the unconditioned, and you understand how this process works, and thereby you have an attainment. So that is the end of the talk. Does anybody have any questions?
If I could, just to clarify insight. Insight is just observation of mind's movement, kind of mindfulness.
So mindfulness is observing how the attention moves, but then understanding where the attention has moved to is the insight. So understanding that, okay, mind is moved. Understanding, okay, now mind is experiencing this. That is the insight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Dustin, I have a question.
Yes.
So this, at the beginning of the sutta, it talked about the bhikkhus going and meeting at a place where there was other people of other, beliefs or whatever, right? And then this came up because there was, or this sutta really talks about, okay, here's what we're doing. Even though you guys are doing these types of, meditations or whatever it is, what are you attaining? What are you trying to get to? What is the intention that you're putting your mind to? And then it talks about, okay, here's what it is, these different jhanas and how you get to basically, it seems like it ended at equanimity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question is?
They would just question each other on how their studies were and what they were doing. What the purpose was to teach somebody to get to Buddha's dispensation. So what it was the purpose of the engagement at that park initially?
Yeah, I mean, this was quite common at that point in time in India, where India was known at that time for having a lot of different sects of belief systems. So this was the time, especially around the Buddha's time, what was known as the Shramana or Samana movement. Shramana was somebody who was a wanderer. So the general word for Shramana is wanderer. And there were different kinds of belief systems. There were belief systems about, there's only fate. There's belief systems about there is, no meaning to life. So nihilism and things like that. And so you had different, let's say, monastic systems or different wanderers who had different belief systems. And they would sometimes exchange ideas. They would sometimes discuss this and that. You'll see in different suttas where the Buddha engages with people from the sect of the Nigantaputta, which is basically the Jain sect, which is still present now in today's present world. And so they were quite cordial amongst each other, even though they had different belief systems. They always wanted to know, what are you talking about, or what are you teaching, or what do you say about this? And so it was sort of like just a symposium that they would just get together and discuss. And sometimes it would result in discussions like this, and sometimes it would even result in heated debates where one was trying to convince the other or convert the other. But that was just the norm back then.
Thank you. Another follow-up question. So we get to this place where, you have hindrances come up, any sort, even the conceit I am. And we are constantly, recognizing, release, relax, bring up a wholesome state of mind, and then go right back to being present, so to speak, let's say, right? There's that dispassion that happens from seeing this in infinite consciousness constantly just arise. After this dispassion, this contentment, this disenchantment, so to speak, happens, that's when the individual goes into an equanimous state of mind, so to speak, right?
Yes.
But what's bringing all this up is this the karmic event? Everything prior, all the, dependent origination, so to speak, causes this karmic event, and this karmic event comes up, and then we are engaging with this, observing it, and then not allowing the, so to speak, staying into the middle way, not pushing, not letting go, just staying there, and then saying, okay, I see it for what it is. Cool.
Right.
Is that all? So
that's basically it. That's basically, right. And you can apply that for your everyday living.
Right.
So, I mean, if you talk about it from the concept of, or the perspective of karma, everything that's happening to you right now is an experience of the culmination of choices you've made at a past moment, which then leads you to experience this right now. So whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, whether it's wholesome or unwholesome, whether it's painful or pleasant, or neither painful nor pleasant, it's just karma. And then if you choose to engage with it by taking it personally, then you're liable to create new choices, which can cause furthering of that karma. But you have equanimity, seeing things as they really are, which is to say you understand it as being impermanent, therefore not worth holding on to, and therefore not self. Then it will weaken. It might come up again, just like a hindrance in your meditation. It might come up again, but it won't be as strong as the last time because you haven't engaged with it. By engaging with it, you're creating or fueling that hindrance further. But through non-engagement, through non-reaction, but through just understanding what's happening and letting go of mind's attraction to it, mind's attachment or aversion to it, then you are taking away the fuel, and that hindrance becomes weaker, and eventually it fades away.
Thank you. So there's times, I guess, when there's a conversation where people talk about fatalism, so to speak. Right?
Yeah.
They see these karmic events almost as fatalism. But however, having that awareness, that mindfulness of watching the mind move it, dependent origination, you can say this is not fatalism because you have that choice.
Exactly.
Okay, excellent.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Thank
In
you.
every given moment, there is a choice. And so because fatalism says, and this was during the Buddha's time as well, I mean, everything that we talk about now in the modern day, which is nihilism and fatalism and other kinds of belief systems, were all there in the Buddha's time. Materialism, you know, all kinds of views were present there. And there's actually a sutta, Digha Nikaya number 2, which actually has a section on the 6 main wrong views from the perspective of the Buddha's dispensation. And he examines each of those, and there's an understanding of why it is a wrong view and so on. But fatalism, the idea, at least from that point in time, was that life or existence is like a yarn. It's like a ball of string. And you just roll out the ball of string and it will just roll out until there's nothing else there. But fatalism says that you are fated to experience so-and-so, including experiencing enlightenment at some point. That means that takes away that effort that is required. That takes away any kind of experience of intention from that process. But that is in direct violation of how we understand karma to be, which is karma is intention. Everything that starts with a choice is intention. And so that intention causes you to act in a certain way. And those actions then give you certain kinds of fruits, good, bad, or indifferent. So when you see that, then you realize that there isn't fatalism. There is choice in every given.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question too. It seems a bit unexpected to see the Buddha link the brahmaviharas and the enlightenment factors with perceiving repulsive and unrepulsive things. Do you have any idea why he links them? Is this perhaps a link to the fact that you can practice them in daily life as well? Or is he talking about the repulsive and unrepulsive within the meditation? Do you have any idea why he suddenly comes up with these?
Yeah, it's both actually, but primarily in daily life. Because like I was talking about earlier, when you think about memories, if you're in a certain mood and you think of those memories, you'll see them one way. And you look at those same memories with a different mood, you'll see them in a completely different way. So what is to be said as being unrepulsive is things like causes and conditions that create in the mind ill will, that create in the mind aversion, that create in the mind irritation. Seeing that as being repulsive and having the unrepulsive, replacing it with loving kindness, replacing it with compassion and so on, is really a practical application in daily life. But I would also say in the meditation itself, one way to interpret this is a lot of people shy away or are even very much aversive towards hindrances. They get bothered by seeing hindrances and say, oh no, my meditation is not going well. And, I don't know if I can meditate now. But if you change your perspective and see hindrances as teachers, There's shedding light on what needs to be done in terms of letting go. When you have that, then you look forward to seeing hindrances. Then you look forward to actually doing the process and letting them go eventually, until eventually there are no hindrances left.
Thank you.
I really like what you said, looking forward to the hindrances. We don't have to look too far.
And if you can laugh yourself, if you can laugh at yourself with it, then that's even better.
Yes.
And it lets go of it even quicker.
Hi, Delson. Thanks for the talk. A question, well, two questions. One is that during the days that there's a lot of restlessness and you have got, for instance, because of your work, your mind is busy, and for instance, your object of meditation is, for instance, quiet mind. How do you start adjusting the mind or adjusting the practice in order to get to that point so you can concentrate, or you can basically pay attention to that object of meditation, basically?
You mean just in daily life?
Yes, yeah. By the time you
Yeah.
get to the to that main, because sometimes you want to sit down and there's a lot of restlessness and your mind is very busy because of the work or other things that's happening during the day. So you need to do probably adjustment to your meditation before you get to your main object of meditation, which is, for instance, quiet mind. Any recommendation you have for that?
Well, I mean, you have to first let go of anything that's happening in terms of a distraction. So you first have to recognize, it goes back again always to the heart of the practice, which is right effort. I mean, it's as simple as just 6Ring and recognizing that the mind is distracted. So if you see that the mind is restless, that in itself is recognizing that there's restlessness going on. Or if you see that the mind is having craving for something, that in itself is the recognized step. Then you utilize the rest of the 6Rs to come back. So it is just a constant effort of seeing what adjustments need to be made. Now, when you talk about quiet mind in daily life, it is, practically speaking, more challenging for the mind to remain in quiet mind while other things are going on than it is for you to do in the meditation. And by extension, that means for any of the objects of meditation, whether it's loving kindness or equanimity or joy or whatever it might be, because obviously your eyes are open and you're doing other things. But if you have the awareness in the background of just loving kindness, that is enough. As long as there's no craving, as long as there's no restlessness, as long as none of the hindrances are present. And if you notice that they're there, then all you have to do is 6R them and come back to the awareness of it. Eventually, it's just like when the mind becomes, it just becomes preoccupied with something while you're doing something. Like you're writing an email and you're thinking about somebody else, or you're watching a movie, but now you're thinking about what happened at work. So that means your mind is not there. It's just preoccupied with something. So here you're making the shift in the other direction. Whatever it is you're doing, you're consciously making an effort to infuse your actions, to infuse everything that you're doing with that quality of the brahmavihara or with that quality of quiet mind. So it's a process of effort and the right intention to continually pay attention.
Okay. Regarding the meditation, I mean, sometimes, of course, the restlessness is so high and the energy is so much that, the simple letting go or 6R doesn't cut it, basically. It's just, I don't know if there is anything else needs to be done, or just constant doing that, or sometimes I even try.
You can go for, go ahead.
Walking meditation, for instance, in the apartments to see if that can help. But then, and then after that, I sit down. But yeah, I don't know if there's any other way to approach that.
But is there a point that the mind calms down or the whole meditation is active?
It comes down a little bit, yeah. But sometimes, some days it doesn't. I mean,
well, some days it won't. You just have to
Yeah.
accept the fact that some days it won't, and you continually make the effort to let go. You have to first, of course, let go of any expectations of what the sit's going to be like. And then if it is restless, it is restless. That is the reality of the situation. And so you just make amends with that and let it go and continue letting go. And some days it will be good and some days it won't be as good. And those days when it's not as good, it's just a more active meditation. That's it. But if you're continuing to 6R, just know that if you're actively making the effort to let go, then it is having an effect, and it has a cumulative effect. Eventually, it will result in a mind that is less and less restless.
Okay. If we talk about, of course, let the unwholesome thoughts goes away, and we basically bring up wholesome, and of course, the smile is one of them. And is there any other wholesome thought you think or recommend we bring it up?
Loving kindness, compassion, joy,
Okay.
or equanimity.
Yeah, all of those. Okay, good. I don't want to take too much of time. I've got more questions, but I'll come back to you later. Thanks.
Okay. Hello, Clausen. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I have a question because usually when we're talking about the range of 3, 4, 5 hour sits or whatever, usually, in twim, we are talking about the clear, quiet mind or signless state or whatever. I'm finding that my experience is being different nowadays in the sense that I spend most of the time in the 4th jhana, actually, with a lot of equanimity. Could you explain if that, may be a normal occurrence, or maybe, I don't feel like I'm pushing too hard or anything, but, maybe it's coming out from pushing too hard and my mind goes to equanimity instead of silent state. If you could develop a bit about, long sits and, in my case, the 4th jhana, but, in other cases, maybe another jhana.
Yeah, so if you're staying with 4th jhana or any of the jhanas, I don't see anything inherently unwholesome about it, obviously, or inherently wrong with it. If it's just wanting to stay in the 4th jhana for like 2-3 hours at a time, the experience, is there only just the equanimity or other things are going on?
No, usually it's mostly, there are some distractions, but usually it's just equanimity and surprisingly no boredom. It's not, it's not something that gets long or anything. It feels like, very, very, just very light, really. So yeah.
And do you see that happening even outside of the formal sitting where the mind is just staying there?
Outside of the formal sitting, yes. Yeah, definitely. It just really tends to that, 4th jhana, yeah, that equanimity.
I think that the only thing I can say about that is just let go of any sense of I am in the 4th jhana. Let go of the conceit related to the jhana. There is, that's it. And then let the natural progression of the mind take hold of whatever has to happen.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Just one more question. After the cessation experience, the mind tends to latch on a lot to, I don't know, the nibbana experience or whatever, the relief there. But as I know, anagamis also experience that, latching onto that relief. But anagamis don't have any sensual desire or aversion. So if we're latching onto, that seeing nibbana, I don't know, 3 days later, what are we latching onto? If the anagami has no sensual desire, what is he latching onto? Because he definitely isn't latching onto nibbana anymore, so to say, is he? Or, and that's just my question. I don't know how to frame it better.
No, that's a good question. That's a good question, because you have to then distinguish what we talk about in terms of sensual craving. Because what we're talking about is craving for sensual pleasures in reference to the 5 physical senses. But there is a pleasure beyond the 5 physical senses, which is the supramundane, which is any jhana or any experience of relief from letting go, or any experience of nibbana or krodha, or whatever it might be. If you go back to the many kinds of feeling, Sutta, that is Majjhima Nikaya 59, Buddha even talks about cessation of perception and feeling as being pleasurable. But he says nothing about, it being a sense pleasure. So when we talk about sense pleasures, it's about these specific 5 physical senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body. But the experience of the jhana happens in the mind, which is beyond the 5 physical senses. So yes, the anagami will still have clinging, but it's the subtlest clinging to something that is wholesome, which is jhana, or an experience that is happening on a supramundane level.
Okay. Thank you, Telson.
You're welcome.
Is it not mana that is comparison with things or anything anagami will have? Can you please?
Mana will still be there. Yeah.
Mana means comparison.
Right. Mana will still be there for the anagami, because mana has different meanings in terms of the word conceit, because one is to compare, to measure with one's self and the outside world or other people. But there are 40 different kinds of conceit, depending upon the situation and context. But that always stems from the idea of I am, the idea that this is me, this is mine. As whenever you have this image of I am, there will be bound to be some kind of comparison. So for the anagami also, there'll be the idea that I am in this jhana, or I am experiencing this jhana, and I'm enjoying this jhana. But if you let go of that, then you let go of the conceit to that as well.
That is clinging towards panchakanda. That is the main. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Right, Nelson, again, I guess one question. You mentioned during the day, or when you are not sitting on the cushion, we just do a loving kindness mildly on the back. I used to do vipassana before this twim, and they put a lot of emphasis on sampajanya and being aware of the mind and body all day. Is it something that you also think we should do during the day when we are off the cushion, and during the day, or love and kindness would be enough?
Basically, when you are aware of staying with the loving kindness, you have that sampajanya, because what you're doing is you're aware of how mind's attention is moving. That's really what it is. So it's not about being aware of what's happening with mind, what's happening with body. It's being aware of how attention is moving in relation to what's happening with mind and in relation to what's happening with body. So when you are staying with loving kindness, then you're aware that you're with loving kindness. When your mind moves away from loving kindness, then you have the sampajanya to be able to say, okay, now there is no more awareness of the loving kindness. There's no more, the attention has moved. So when we talk about sampajanya, that's another way of understanding, that clear comprehension, which is knowing what is going on, understanding that mind's attention has moved. That's another synonym for Dhammavichaya, synonym for investigation of states.
Okay. No, I thought when they talk about sampajanya, they talk about taking the body and mind as, or anything that moves an object, or body and mind. But I thought loving kindness then would be the object of meditation during the day.
Loving kindness is the object insofar as it's the anchor to stay in the present and know what's going on. But when you're having the mindfulness, you see that it's no longer on its object of meditation, then you bring it back. In seeing that it's no longer on its object of meditation, you are exercising that sampajanya. So it has nothing to do with just being aware of what's happening in mind and body. It's always coming back to how is mind movement? How is mind moving? How is the attention moving? And to anchor that attention back so that it doesn't move at all. When it doesn't move at all, there is no presence of any of the 5 hindrances. There is no presence of any kind of craving or resistance or restlessness or sloth and torpor or any kind of doubt.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Okay, I have one more question. If we get to a portion where we feel like we're identifying with something too much, would it be okay to say, I forgive myself for wanting to identify with that?
You could. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that. That basically, when you talk about forgiveness, what that is releasing it. It's just a process of releasing anything. If you forgive yourself for doing something or for misunderstanding or whatever it might be, you're just releasing any attachment to that. You're releasing any of the identification with that. You could do it that way, or you can just realize, oh, here's identification going on, and just relax it, relax any tension around it and pull back away from it. Either way works because it's just one and the same.